I started using Duolingo recently to learn Spanish. Duolingo is an app on my phone that delivers Spanish lessons right there on my phone in friendly, digestible, like 3-minute mini lessons. Now, this is not an endorsement of Duolingo as a language app among competing language apps. There are a lot of them out there. It's not even an endorsement of using a language app to learn a language. I mean, I do seem to be learning some Spanish, which is fun, but really, here's the best part of Duolingo. Here's the way Duolingo instantly improved my life, aside from the fact that I can now order a fish hamburger with or without cheese in 2 languages. When I find myself with 5 minutes to kill and my phone in my hand, in between meetings, waiting in the car, waiting for a show to start, waiting for the dogs to do their thing, needing a mental break, or let's be honest, just procrastinating because I don't want to do the thing. When I find myself with 5 minutes to kill and my phone in my hand, now I fire up Duolingo and I do a Spanish lesson instead of doom scrolling on Facebook. Doom scrolling is when you find yourself scrolling through social media, bouncing from negative story to negative story, each headline confirming, as if you didn't already know, that the world is a terrible place and getting worse fast. Each comment confirming there are a lot of bad ideas, negative thoughts, and terrible opinions out there. Bad news sells. It has always been thus. And the Facebook algorithm knows that stories that make people angry get more response and more engagement than stories that make people happy. So the algorithm biases towards the outrage inducing in what it shows you, or at least it used to if you believe the congressional testimony. So using Duolingo instead of doom scrolling has made my life instantly better. It used to be when I had a spare minute, I would go to my news feed and it would be Mississippi guy threatens to crash plane into Walmart. Now when I have a minute, it's ¿Dónde está la biblioteca? And it's better. Here's the thing. I don't believe our brains were ever designed to know all of the bad things that are happening all the time, everywhere. Social media and the 24/7 news cycle collapse distance. So all kinds of bad things that were formerly happening somewhere out there land in our consciousness like they happened in our backyard. Most of the time, this isn't information we need in the sense that there's nothing we can do with it or about it or for it. But all the bad news, and in particular all the anger, can give us a skewed perception of the kind of world that we live in. When I was doing my stint as a hospital chaplain, which is one of the requirements for becoming a Unitarian Universalist minister, my supervisor at the hospital told us a story about when she herself was first learning to be a chaplain. She worked in the pediatric wing, which is a tough place to be working as a healthcare professional. And so she was working day in and day out with a lot of sick kids and sick babies. And she started to get really depressed. And the supervisor asked her, what was going on? And she's explained that she was just feeling flattened by the omnipresence of illness, that the world was just like this terrible place in which vulnerable children get sick all the time. And her supervisor heard her and pointed out that it was her job to be around illness. And so, of course, she encountered a lot of illness, but it was skewing her perceptions to where she was feeling like illness was the only reality. So her supervisor actually gave her this assignment. Every day before she was allowed to go into the pediatric ward, she had to go down to the nursery and play with healthy babies for an hour. Just surround herself with healthy, happy babies for an hour, and it helped her regain her balance. Because yes, illness was real, vulnerability is real, but so was health. And all of those babies, most of the time, were okay. Good things are happening all the time, and good people are quietly being good to each other all the time in ordinary and unobtrusive ways. People are asking after their friends, caring for their neighbors, bringing meals to total strangers, raising up each other's children, rescuing stray pets. And then sometimes, occasionally, people do extraordinary things, Take Nick Bostic, for example, a 25-year-old pizza delivery driver from Lafayette, Indiana. Maybe you heard of this guy. On July 11th, Nick was out driving after midnight, just kind of out driving, and he passed a 2-story house that was engulfed in flames. Without hesitation, he pulled over and rushed into the home, the burning home. Upstairs, he found the 18-year-old babysitter trying to gather up 2 13-year-olds and a 1-year-old baby and get them out of the house. And Nick led the 4 children downstairs and out the front door. And that was when the babysitter began yelling that baby Kay, their 6-year-old sister, baby Kay, was still missing. So Nick turned around and ran back inside the house. He couldn't see anything from the thick smoke, so he used his ears to locate baby Kay. When he found her upstairs at that point, the only means of escape was the 2nd-story window. So Nick broke out the glass and jumped to safety, cradling the little girl in his arms, carrying them both to safety. Her only injury was a small cut to her foot. Nick, meanwhile, suffered deep cuts to both arms, serious smoke inhalation, but all he asked when he collapsed and the paramedics rushed over to see if he was okay was, "Is the baby okay? Is the baby okay?" He spent 2 days in the hospital recovering. Nick says he only did what he would have wanted someone to do for him and his family. Or take Fritz Sam, a Brooklyn Uber driver and the 2nd hero to run into a burning building just this summer. On August 20th, Mr. Sam was driving a fare to the airport when, according to the Washington Post, they passed a 4-story tenement building with fire and smoke pouring out of an upstairs window. There were no rescue workers on the scene, so Mr. Sam asked his passenger, one Ms. Jemima James Way, "Can we stop and help?" "Obviously," she replied. So they raced up to the entrance while panicked residents were making their way out. There was intense fire, smoke, broken glass everywhere. It looked bad, said Mrs. Way. No one knew if anyone was still inside, so Mr. Sam made the decision to enter the building. Ms. Way would later report to the Post it wasn't even a calculated decision. He just ran without hesitation. He ran straight into the fire. From inside, Mr. Sam yelled for people to get out and then helped direct them to the exit. One woman he encountered was in shock and confused, and she refused to leave. So Mr. Sam told her, "If you're not leaving, I'm not leaving." And he stayed with her, and he eventually was able to persuade her to get out. And then he went back inside again, looking for more people. He ferried people out in this way for 6 minutes and had gotten the last resident to safety when firefighters arrived. Then he resumed delivering his fare, apologizing to Miss Way for the smell of smoke in the car, and she made her flight. And no one was injured in the fire. Mr. Sam, a father of 2, said, "It's not my family, but it's someone else's family. If it was my family and I wasn't able to be there, I would hope that somebody else would go in and help them." Anybody could do this, he said. We all have it in us. Now, most of us, hopefully, will never have occasion to find out if we do indeed have it in us to run into a burning building. But most of us are loving the living, as our reading today says, in ordinary ways, showing up in those heartfelt moments just when we are needed, bringing food, bringing flowers, offering a helping hand or a compassionate presence. It matters. What anyone will remember, says the poet, is that we came. And our showing up for one another is an antidote to isolation. It is an offering of hope to one another in those little blessings. And never discount the power of those little blessings, those little offerings of kindness. We all have it in us, the poet reminds us, to offer healing to every household we enter. And we all have it in us to make a difference in our communities, and we do make a difference. And I want to give you just one example that gave me hope this week. And it has a connection to you and to this congregation and your efforts to make a difference. According to WTHR and the mayor's office, gun violence is down almost 20% in Indianapolis this year. It has fallen more dramatically in the last 10 months than it has in a decade. And the news surprised me, like I'm sure it surprises most of you, because we only see the awful headlines. And the level of violence we do see in those headlines is shocking, and of course it is unacceptable. But here in Indy, it is also falling at a rate that is 5 times faster than the national average for big cities. And here's the connection to this congregation. Since 2014, UUI has been partnering with Faith in Indiana to bring proven gun violence reduction strategies to our city. And it has taken this long, since 2014, to educate our local officials about those strategies and convince them that they could work here. And then to fly our local public safety officials out to other cities so that they could talk to those people and see how those programs work on the ground. And then to work with officials to get the programs implemented, and then to get them funded. It was 7 years of doing this work to get a fully funded program, and you were with this every step of the way. And I remember in 2019 sitting at a table with the mayor and the chief of police and the public safety commissioner, and we were making our case again for the city to somehow find the funding this program needed to succeed. There were more than 25 of us ordinary citizens around that table with the city officials and the Faith in Indiana organizers. It was like 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. And the chief of police actually got choked up that night. It had been a rough week in the city of Indianapolis, and there had been a couple of really bad shootings that week. And he said he had never seen in all of his time so many concerned people sitting at a table like this, just because they cared. People of all ages, people of all backgrounds, from every walk of life, showing up because they cared. And he told us all that it gave him hope. And a number of members of this congregation were at that meeting. And even more of you were at a gun violence rally in 2021, led by local clergy here in Butler-Tarkington, where we again partnered with Faith in Indiana in calling on the city to use American Rescue Plan funds to finally fund fully the Gun Violence Reduction Initiative. 7 years, again, after we started this journey. And they did. They did fund it fully. And now, 10 months later, gun violence is falling faster than it has in a decade in the city of Indianapolis. And that didn't happen without you and lots of people like you showing up time and again for 7 years. That's how organizing works. And we'll have to keep showing up, because that's also how organizing works. You have to keep showing up. And that's mostly what it is, just showing up. And anyone can do that. Show up in your community the way we show up at each other's homes when we're needed. We all have it in us to make a difference in our communities, and you did. And I want to share just one more hopeful story with you today, because in a different way, this is a story that fills me with hope, and it's about salamanders. And now I've either lost you totally or you're leaning forward like, tell me more, you have my complete attention. There are species of salamanders that spend the winter in the forest, hidden away safely underground, waiting for a certain time in the spring when vernal pools form. Vernal pools are like little temporary ponds formed by the overflow of excess rainwater. They're temporary. And the salamanders can tell by the air temperature and the soil saturation just when the time is right for these vernal pools to have formed. And when that time comes, the salamanders all exit their hidey holes en masse, and they do a great migration from the forest down to the vernal pools. And there they mate and they lay eggs. And they can find their way unerringly to their own personal familiar vernal pool. They follow magnetic lines. Once they get close, they use their sense of smell. It's a long, lumbering migration from the forest to the tide pools. It's done at night when the cool night air is easier on their sensitive salamander skin. And for millions of years, the whole system worked pretty well, until a too clever by half species of Johnny-come-lately primates built roads right across their migration grounds and started barreling down those roads at 70 miles an hour. Salamanders are not sprightly. It takes a salamander a long time to plod its way across a 2-lane or 4-lane road, many minutes, to make that perilous crossing. And when a salamander meets a motorist going 70 miles an hour, it is not a good outcome for a salamander. But here's the thing. On those evenings when you will find the migrating salamanders making their perilous journey across the highways, you will now also find teams of those very same Johnny-come-lately primates walking along the side of the road with flashlights, waiting for the salamanders and then gently picking them up and ferrying them across to the other side for safety. Sometimes these are students, sometimes these are groups of friends, sometimes it's parents out under the stars with their children, teaching them all about nature and their place in it. Citizen salamander good Samaritans all over the country. Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about rescuing salamanders in upstate New York in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. In Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula, there's a place outside Marquette where they now shut down stretches of road every night for weeks in the spring during migration season, just shut the roads down. They started doing this in 2020 after a 2019 study found that 400 salamanders were killed by cars each year on that road. So now the rule there is look but don't touch, and people are allowed to come out on foot just to observe the wonder of the migration, but cars are forbidden. Scientists, naturalists, ordinary folks, families, we all have it in us to care for the natural world at all ages. Here in Indianapolis, the Keep Indianapolis Beautiful folks have a summer program where school-age kids can be deputized as amateur pollinator observers. So kids can observe and record like how many bees they find and what kind over what span of time, and they turn that data into the city where real scientists use it to track the health of our local bee populations. We all have it in us to care for the natural world. Our religious tradition is a hopeful tradition, and it's hopeful about us, because we all have the capacity to wonder, and we all have a capacity to notice, and we all have a capacity to act in ways large and small. We can all bring more love into the world and be the embodiment of hope for someone around us who needs it. And we all need it, and we all have it in us. Blessed be, and amen.